So the Las Vegas Raiders have officially gotten down to their 53-man roster, and today we're going to talk about it. We're going to talk about some of the guys that they cut, some of the guys they could potentially regret that were ultimately cut, and then we'll look at the official depth chart and kind of how it looks like right now for the Raiders. We do have the updated version as well. So the Raiders did make some cuts yesterday. They ended up releasing a bunch of players. I didn't actually get into it yesterday because obviously we're waiting for all of the guys to kind of get cut before we kind of got into it. But we talked about some of these guys, right? Yesterday, we had talked about Gottlieb Aziz already. We had talked about him, for example. Andre Carter was also cut by the Las Vegas Raiders yesterday. This one was kind of surprising to me because, Carter looked really good in preseason. Truth be told, the guy to me looked really, really, really impressive. And it is interesting because they released him yesterday, or, quote unquote, waived him yesterday, which means, this is going to give a bunch of teams to kind of get that jump start if they wanted to potentially take Andre Carter from the Raiders. Which tells me the Raiders are not planning to bring Carter back to the practice squad. Now, we do have to realize Andre Carter is a player of the past regime, so I'm not 100% surprised that he was released. Carter's more of a pass rusher as opposed to like a run defender. And I think Pete Carroll's system is definitely a little bit more based off of being able to defend the run first and foremost. So Andre Carter was obviously one of the guys that kind of surprised me. He was released yesterday, as was Amari Gainer. And I think Amari Gainer was one of the guys that a lot of people were kind of surprised to see get waived. It's kind of interesting because, this scheme and system is different. We all know Pete Carroll runs that cover three, heavy zone type of scheme. He puts safeties sometimes at the linebacker position. We've kind of seen that happen with Jamal Adams. Last year, Dan Quinn did the same thing with Jeremy Chin, right? So former safety, kind of converted him to linebacker. They run the same scheme, and it's interesting because Amari Gainer had a lot of success under Patrick Graham, right? He was really, really good in his rookie preseason, and he ended up making the 53-man roster for the Raiders. But Amari Gainer's been waived, and the Raiders don't plan to bring him back, at least according to Amari Gainer, who had posted on social media. He's basically done. The Raiders don't plan to bring him back. This one was kind of shocking to me as well because I always felt like he had upside, but we really didn't hear anything about Gainer this offseason. Other than the guy saying this guy's in like really, really good shape, we didn't hear anything else, right? So I'm not really surprised that Gainer ended up getting cut. And he didn't really flash a whole lot in preseason either. Again, I just don't think this scheme is really built for a guy like Gainer. He's just like 6'4", so he's on the bigger side. Another guy that ended up getting cut that I think a lot of people were high on initially when he was kind of coming to the Las Vegas Raiders, right? Some people were like, hey, this guy could definitely make the roster, is Minnesota defensive end Jai Joyner. He was a guy that had some pass rush upside. He had some potential. Never really worked out. So the Raiders obviously released him as well. And you guys can just kind of see some of the other guys that got released yesterday. Jared Hufford, one of the strongest players that came out of this past class. He got waived as well. And the Raiders also relieved these 4 veteran players. Marquise Callaway, really didn't expect him to make the roster. Colin Johnson, 6'5" wide receiver. I was kind of like 50-50 with this guy. Jalen Smith, not surprised. Philip Dorsett. I mean, this guy's been on and off on so many different rosters. We knew all about all these guys, and literally 10 minutes ago, the Raiders basically put a whole nother set of guys out there. And this one has multiple cuts that I don't think Raiders fans kind of expected. And literally, the very first guy is the guy I would not have expected to be cut. Zach Carter. The very first player on this list, a guy that was taking first-team snaps for the Raiders in base defense, literally for the entirety of training camp. But I think Tonka Hemingway, really came on strong, and I feel like the Raiders may have looked at Zach Carter and said, hey, there's nothing Zach Carter really provides that Tonka Hemingway doesn't already kind of provide. Plus, they made that trade for Thomas Booker, and I think Thomas Booker has a ton of upside as well. So I'm not surprised that Zach Carter got cut, but this guy was taking first-team snaps for the Raiders, in preseason. Even last year, Zach Carter played a lot of snaps for the Raiders. So this one's kind of interesting, given that our defensive tackle position isn't really that good, right? At least with what we're kind of seeing right now. Chris Collier, we had already known this guy was going to get cut. Although it happened today, we had known this yesterday. Jafari Harvey never really flashed. Shedrick Jackson's another guy that ended up getting released. He had a really good preseason, in my opinion, for the Raiders. Wouldn't be surprised to see him potentially come back onto the practice squad. Matt Jones, another guy that had a really good preseason. Again, not surprised given that our linebacker position is so damn so damn deep, and there's just a lot of depth at that position. Trayvon May is another guy that got cut. He actually looked pretty good in the preseason. I think he had like 2 sacks for the Raiders. But again, I'm not surprised this could be a guy that the Raiders bring back. If not on the practice squad, maybe at some point next year for another visit. Antonio Mafi, it's hard to say I'm like surprised he was cut. And some of these guys are practice squad candidates for the Raiders, right? Sincere McCormick is one that I did not want to see actually happen, but I think, we're at the point where, Sincere McCormick was a good running back for the Raiders last season, but running back is a fairly easy position to hit on, given you make those investments. And, the Raiders haven't put a lot of investments in the running back position over the past 4 or 5 years. Ever since they drafted Josh Jacobs, from that point forward, they never really invested a whole lot in the running back room. Obviously, this season, they drafted Ashton Jeanty, which was the first time we invested in that group. But we still need another running back. And I was hoping Sincere McCormick would have an absolute awesome preseason. He was okay. He had some moments, but generally speaking, he didn't flash enough. And the fact that the Raiders went out there and got Raheem Mostert and they brought him in, I'm not surprised that McCormick's kind of on the outside. Of course, Zamir White has looked good as well. I would hope that they bring him back to the practice squad, but we'll see if that ends up happening. Guys like Tommy Millott and Cam Miller, who are also waived, these are practice squad candidates for the Raiders. These are guys that the Raiders drafted. So these are strong practice squad candidates. Cam Miller's a guy you have to bring back, right? Obviously, we drafted him. He had a phenomenal first game of the preseason, but he struggled a little bit the next 2 games, which is why I think the Raiders felt comfortable waiving him. You can just re-sign him once he clears waivers. And don't overlook that fact right there, right? A lot of these guys, as soon as they clear waivers, as long as no other team, essentially wants these guys, the Raiders can assign a bunch of these guys, right? I don't know. I think it's 13 players. Don't quote me on that. But you can have 13 practice squad players. So, a third of these guys are going to be brought back to the Raiders. And we have heard reports of certain guys that the Raiders are already kind of looking to bring back. For example, Lockie Tossie was cut as well, which is interesting because he's an international pathway program player and he doesn't count against the roster spot. So I don't know what the point of releasing him was. But truth be told, his tape was not that good. This guy's clearly not ready. I know some Raider fans really like Tossie. I wasn't as high on him because of the fact that you can just watch his tape and he wasn't ready. And that doesn't mean he can't develop and get better. So I do hope Lockie Tossie comes back to the Raiders. He does have upside. He does have potential. But he has a long ways to go to develop, right? Even more so than a guy like Charles Grant. Charles Grant's a lot closer than Lockie Tossie is, as an example. But the Raiders will potentially bring him back, assuming another team does not claim him. There are some reports on Twitter that Lockie Tossie is, a lot of teams are looking at this guy because he does qualify for that IPP program spot, right? Trey Taylor, safety, ends up getting cut. I'm not going to say I'm surprised with this one. He hasn't looked that good. He didn't really flash, in my opinion. But I also wouldn't be surprised if he's brought back. I also wouldn't be surprised if he's not brought back. Again, Patrick Graham brought in Trey Taylor. Right? Patrick Graham wanted to mold this guy into the kind of safety that he can utilize in his scheme and system. And we've switched schemes, right? So Trey Taylor doesn't really fit that mold. Greedy Vance is another guy that the Raiders are releasing now. Some people are disappointed with Greedy Vance being released, but there are reports out there that the Raiders plan to bring him back. So assuming he clears the waivers, Greedy Vance will be re-signed. Same with JT Woods, who JT Woods was literally competing to potentially start for the Raiders. Right, Cameron Richardson, JT Woods, Darian Porter, those 3 guys were legit competing to potentially start. And of course, the Raiders went out there and brought in Kai Blue Kelly, and he started kind of competing as well. And then Kai Blue Kelly, Darian Porter kind of competed, and JT Woods started playing in the 3rd and 4th quarter of the preseason. I kind of felt like at that point he might not make the actual roster, but he could be brought back to the practice squad. So we'll see. He is a guy that is obviously being considered. Dalton Wagner has officially been released by the Raiders as well. I'm not surprised, to be honest with you guys. When I look at the Las Vegas Raiders offensive tackles, very, very, very weak group of guys, in my opinion, after the 2 starters. All right, DJ Glaze, Colt Miller, solid. After that, man, it just doesn't look all that good. And obviously, Charles Grant is young, He's a rookie. I think he'll develop nicely, but guys like Dalton Wagner and Thayer Munford as well just did not flash enough, right? Dalton Wagner just was not quick enough. And I talked about this in my video I did on Sunday, where I talked about the Cardinals and Raiders game. There was a segment where I talked about Thayer Munford's struggles. I also talked about Dalton Wagner. He just doesn't have the movement that you want from an offensive tackle. Having upside when you come in, if you're a UDFA, offensive lineman or whatever, you can see guys that have upside, that have potential, that could maybe make the roster and if they continue to develop, potentially start down the line. But if you don't develop and you don't get better, you're not going to actually be on that roster more than 2 or 3 years. And I think this was Dalton Wagner's 3rd year, so it just kind of made sense to move off of him at this point. The only other guy that kind of surprised me that was released was Terrell Edmunds. I don't know why the Raiders would release Terrell Edmunds. I understand it. I think some of these releases and waves, I think some of these are very difficult to make, right? And let's just switch over and let's talk a little bit about the actual depth chart, right? Like the actual official depth chart that is now out there. And this isn't like officially saying that like this guy's starting or this guy's starting, but this is just kind of the depth chart post all of the different releases, right? This has basically been updated. I'm not surprised to see certain guys that ended up making this roster, because you got to also think about it like, for example, with the right tackle, Thayer Munford. We know Thayer Munford is not a good football player. And for him to be the Raiders' backup offensive tackle, it's almost like you just don't have any other option, so you have to roll forward with this guy. And I feel like that's kind of what's happened right now with Thayer Munford. Now, I think there's a real chance, and I believe, I'm not exactly sure when it processes. I think it's Wednesday when the official transactions will process. But when that happens, if the Raiders, they might actually go out there and say, hey, we want to bring in a different offensive tackle. Dan Skipper of the Detroit Lions was released. He's a guy that could be a really good backup offensive tackle. Essa Poole out of Washington State. He was with the Chiefs. He ended up getting waived. Now, the Chiefs want him back to the practice squad, but if you're the Raiders and you want upside and you want a guy that actually looks good on tape, that too, like Dan Munford's look terrible. So if you want to go out there and get a guy that could actually be a swing tackle or a backup tackle, if one of your guys gets hurt, you want to look at the waiver wire, right? And you want to try to bring one of these guys in. So I would not be surprised if over the next 2 days, the Raiders end up bringing 4 or 5 guys, and they end up releasing more of some of the guys that actually did make the 53-man roster. Like Thayer Munford, to me, it just doesn't make sense, right? And you guys all watch the tape as well. This guy literally got Aiden O'Connell hurt. So, I think the Raiders will have to obviously think about certain things with the offense or with the offensive line, the defensive line. There's been some good defensive tackles that have been released as well. So, we'll see what ends up happening. Brock Bowers, Michael Mayer, Ian Thomas. The rookie looked pretty good. Was it Carter Runyon, I think is his name. Let me see if I can find him. All right, Carter Runyon. He was released by the Raiders. Wouldn't be surprised if he ends up back on the practice squad. Our tight end room this season is very, very, very strong. So, Ian Thomas was a starter for many, many years, and now he's our 3rd tight end. So it just kind of goes to show you how good the Raiders, tight end room is this season. Our wide receivers, no surprise: Trey Tucker, Jack Bech, Kobe Myers, Dante Thornton Jr., and, of course, we signed Amari Cooper as well, so he's not listed here, but he'll be that 5th wide receiver for the Raiders. Running back room, some people are surprised with, obviously, Sincere McCormick being released. We have 4 running backs that the Raiders are going to keep on the roster: Ashton Jeanty, Zamir White, Raheem Mostert, and, of course, Dylan Labe. And, Labe is not being capped because he's a good running back. He's being capped because the guy is a legit special teams player, legit. And I'm not overstating that. This guy's out there, tackling people, bringing people down. And that's his best value right now for the Raiders. I'm confident to say Dylan Labe is with the Raiders because of what he provides on special teams. So shout out to Dylan Labe to be able to kind of stick around with the Raiders. We have our 3 running backs that I think will be our 3 main running backs. It's going to be an interesting season this season, man. I'm excited. I'm glad that we're kind of moving forward at this point. On the defensive side, there's really not a whole lot of surprises. We talked about Zach Carter being cut. I think that's probably the only one that you could say is potentially surprising. outside of that, man, every other guy here just kind of makes sense. Maxx, Malcolm, Charles Snowden, Tyree Wilson. Those are your 4 edge players. We talked about Andre Carter. We'll see if they bring him back. I hope they do. Jonah Laulu, Adam Butler, those will probably be your 2 starting defensive tackles. And I think Tonka Hemingway, Lee Fodu, Thomas Booker, I think those 3 guys will definitely play a lot this season as like the rotational guys. Even JJ Pegues, I think he might play a lot for the Raiders this season as well. He's flashed the last 2 weeks, so we'll see what ends up happening with that with the D-line as well. I wouldn't be surprised if the Raiders want to add another pass rusher potentially. We'll see what actually happens there. Linebackers, not really surprised, but I will say this: the Raiders linebacker unit is going to be strong as hell this season. When you have a Landon Roberts, who has looked good right over the last 2 preseason games, he did not look good in that first one, but he has the last 2 games. When you have a Landon Roberts, when you have Jermaine Pratt, and Pratt's looked good as well, Jamal Adams has flashed. Even Tommy Eichenberg looked really, really, really good these past 2 weeks. Cody Lindenberg had like 7 tackles in this most recent game. Our linebacking room, in my opinion, is very strong. And I want to see what this unit can actually do when that first game against the Patriots comes up. And I want to see which 2 guys end up starting for the Raiders. Obviously, right now you have Jermaine Pratt, Landon Roberts, and Devin White as your 3 main guys here. But how do you keep Jamal Adams off the field? Jamal Adams is just a straight-up playmaker. You put that guy out there, he's going to disrupt offenses, right? This guy gets after it. He's explosive. He's smart. He understands football. How do you keep Jamal Adams off the field? And given we're probably going to run a lot of nickel defense, who's the other linebacker at that point? Is it Landon Roberts? Is it Jermaine Pratt? Is it Devin White? It's going to be interesting to kind of figure out which guys play. The cornerback room, the battle, I guess, in the cornerback room, and even the safeties, I'm not really surprised, but like the cornerback room was kind of that revolving door that we couldn't really figure out. But we did get guys that ended up, standing out a little bit more than some other guys. JT Woods obviously ended up getting cut. Kai Blue Kelly kind of comes out of nowhere, and he ends up winning a roster spot with the Raiders, and the guy looked good. Darnay Holmes, he's expected to be the starting slot corner for the Raiders. Anytime they get into the traditional nickel, anytime they get into the big nickel, it'll be, some combination of Jeremy Chin down in the box. And then Thomas Harper or Chris Smith will end up at that free safety position with Isaiah Polamau. They'll kind of split while Chin ends up down in the box. I'm not surprised with our cornerback and our DBs, generally speaking. It doesn't look super strong right now, at least on paper, right? Like Darnay Holmes, Kai Blue Kelly, Eric Stokes. Most people didn't even know who these guys were like a year ago, no offense, right? But we'll see what they can actually do. It's scheme and system always matters more than anything else. And I think when you have guys like Darnay Holmes and Darian Porter, you have guys like Eric Stokes, and these guys have some things to prove. Darian Porter hasn't played corner that long. Can he actually have success at that position? He's a rookie, and the Raiders obviously tried all these other guys, and for the most part, Darian Porter's kind of won that job, right? He's beat all these other veteran players essentially. Eric Stokes, the Packers gave up on this guy, former first-round pick. Kai Blue Kelly's 15, basically, right? We'll see what ends up happening, man. But I do think the Raiders' first-team defensive unit, I think it's pretty solid, man. I really, really do think it's pretty solid. They can obviously still continue to build and continue to add weapons on the defensive side. But look, when you have guys like Maxx Crosby, you have guys like Jamal Adams, you have Jeremy Chin, right? I don't think we've seen anything with Jeremy Chin yet, but that's because he hasn't played a lot, right? Jeremy Chin is supposed to be one of the 2 best players on this defense. Jamal Adams, Jeremy Chin, Maxx Crosby. Those 3 guys right there are going to be making plays for the Raiders this season. Those are smart-ass football players. Throw in guys with, Isaiah Polamau, Adam Butler, right? Isaiah Polamau has how many interceptions over the past 2 years? Right, the guy forces turnovers for the Raiders. Adam Butler, huge upside. Malcolm Koonce, obviously, we'll see if he can kind of get back to form. I'm excited for the Raiders this season, man. Really, really excited. Punter, kicker, no surprises. AJ Cole, Daniel Carlson. Kick returner, Trey Tucker, Ashton Jeanty, Dylan Labe. I do think Trey Tucker should be the return guy for the most part. But we'll see who the 2 guys end up returning kicks for us. Maybe it'll be Dylan Labe and Trey Tucker. I like Labe as well. I feel like he had a couple of nice punt returns for the Raiders during preseason. We'll see what ends up happening, man. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Let me know if there are any surprise cuts for you guys. I think for the most part, these are the guys that kind of expected to be cut. Maybe like 3 or 4 guys that I would have liked to kind of go the other way, but also understand this roster is probably not finalized. Like, I would not be surprised if we see like 3, 4, even 5 players, kind of overturned within the next couple of days. So we'll see what ends up happening. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. Thumbs up, subscribe, and I will see you guys next time with another video.